The latest revelations from the Young and the Restless suggest that Genoa City is once again on the verge of a quiet but devastating fracture. One that begins not with a gunshot or a courtroom confession, but with a slow erosion of trust, restraint, and emotional stability, particularly within the Newman family. Noah Newman appears poised to leave town once again, a move that on the surface looks like another chapter in his long history of retreat and reinvention. Yet beneath that decision lies a convergence of crises that may permanently alter the lives he leaves behind. At the same time, Nick Newman's escalating dependence on prescription painkillers threatens to push him into behavior so fundamentally at odds with the man he believes himself to be that it could shatter any remaining hope for a renewed future with Sharon Newman. What makes this moment especially dangerous is not simply the addiction itself, but the way it intersects with unresolved family trauma, romantic longing, and a town already stretched thin by emotional instability. The first real warning sign does not arrive as a dramatic collapse but as a subtle, clinical moment inside a hospital, where a request for additional pain medication carries far more weight than it appears to on the surface. Fans have long understood that addiction on the Young and the Restless rarely announces itself loudly at first. Instead, it seeps into daily routines, cloaked in justifications and half-truths. Nick's request for more painkillers is framed as reasonable, even necessary, yet the unease it generates is unmistakable, particularly for viewers who recognize the pattern. This is not merely about physical pain, but about emotional numbness, about a man who has spent years carrying the weight of family expectations, romantic failures, and personal guilt finally reaching for something that promises silence. Sharon, who has grown closer to Nick over the past several months, senses this shift almost instinctively. Their renewed bond has been built not on grand gestures but on shared history, quiet understanding, and the fragile hope that to people who have already broken each other might finally be capable of choosing differently. However, addiction has a way of warping even the most sincere connections, and Nick's growing fixation on medication introduces a silent rival into their relationship, one that demands secrecy, control, and eventually sacrifice. As Nick becomes more entrenched in this private battle, the struggle for access to painkillers threatens to become another formidable obstacle between him and Sharon, not because she lacks compassion, but because she has lived this story before, both with herself and with others she loved. Sharon understands the cost of denial and the danger of enabling, and that understanding places her in an impossible position. Each step closer she takes toward Nick emotionally increases the risk that she will once again be pulled into a cycle of rescue and relapse, hope and disappointment. For Nick, this dynamic becomes a source of resentment and desperation, as the very person he longs to rebuild a future with becomes an unspoken reminder of the consequences he is trying to avoid. Addiction does not merely threaten to derail a potential chic reunion, it threatens to transform it into something toxic and unsustainable, forcing Nick into choices that contradict his self-image as a protector and provider. While Nick's internal unraveling quietly accelerates, another fracture point emerges with Noah Newman's determination to leave Genoa City alongside Sienna Bacall. Noah's decision is not impulsive, but it is deeply reactive, shaped by years of feeling peripheral to the emotional chaos of his family. His relationship with Sienna represents not just romance but escape, an opportunity to define himself outside the gravitational pull of Newman dysfunction. Yet his departure carries consequences far beyond his own life, because Noah's absence destabilizes the already fragile emotional ecosystem surrounding him. For Mariah Copeland, Noah's choice becomes a catalyst for complete psychological collapse. Mariah has long existed in a delicate balance, managing past trauma through structure, relationships, and a fierce sense of loyalty to the family she built with Tessa and Dominic. Noah's departure, particularly at a moment when Nick is spiraling and Sharon is emotionally compromised, removes one of the last stabilizing presences Mariah unconsciously relied upon. As Noah prepares to leave town, Mariah's sense of control begins to erode rapidly, her anxiety mutating into something far more dangerous. What begins as fear of abandonment escalates into a conviction that catastrophe is imminent, that the people she loves are slipping beyond her reach. In this heightened psychological state, Mariah's actions cross a line that cannot be undone when she abducts Dominic Winters. This is not portrayed as an act of malice but as the tragic consequence of a mind overwhelmed by loss, fear, and the inability to distinguish protection from possession. The kidnapping sends shockwaves through Genoa City, transforming private instability into a public emergency and forcing law enforcement into a race against time. Mariah's impending arrest looms not as a resolution but as another rupture, one that will permanently alter her relationships and redefine how the community sees her. Ironically, it is this very crisis that draws Noah back to Genoa City, pulling him into the chaos he was trying to escape. His return is marked not by relief but by grim necessity, as he steps in to run the Shadow Room alongside Sienna, a move that symbolizes both responsibility and resignation. The nightclub becomes more than a business venture, it becomes a refuge, a place where Noah attempts to impose order on a world unraveling around him. Yet his return does not undo the damage already done. Mariah's arrest, Nick's deepening addiction, and Sharon's growing emotional turmoil all converge, creating a future defined less by resolution than by prolonged fallout. The Shadow Room, once a symbol of Noah's independence, now stands as a reminder that escape from Genoa City is never permanent, that the past always reasserts itself when wounds remain unhealed. As these storylines intertwine, The Young and the Restless once again demonstrates its mastery of slow-burn tragedy, where the most devastating consequences arise not from villains or conspiracies, but from flawed people making desperate choices under emotional pressure. Noah's departure and return, Nick's addiction, Sharon's conflicted loyalty, and Mariah's catastrophic breakdown all speak to a central truth of the series, that love, when filtered through unresolved trauma, can become indistinguishable from destruction. The hope for a chic reunion does not vanish in a single moment. It erodes with every compromised decision, every lie told in the name of self-preservation, and every crisis that forces characters to choose between honesty and survival. As Genoa City braces for the legal, emotional, and relational consequences of Dominic's kidnapping, one question hangs heavily over the future: when the dust finally settles, will any of these characters still recognize the people they once believed themselves to be? Or will the choices made in this dark convergence of addiction and abandonment leave scars too deep for reconciliation to ever truly occur? Noah Newman had never intended to become the weak link in a family already hanging together by frayed emotional threads. And that was exactly why his promise to stay in Genoa City carried so much weight. He told Nick he would stay put, that he would be there as an extra pair of eyes and an extra layer of protection around Sharon, at least until the chaos circling their lives settled into something resembling normalcy. It was a quiet vow, not the kind that comes with dramatic music or grand declarations, but it mattered deeply, because it signaled Noah stepping up as both son and brother, recognizing that his parents were walking through a minefield of emotional strain, addiction, and unresolved history. He knew Sharon was emotionally vulnerable, that Nick was slipping into a dependency on painkillers that neither of them wanted to name out loud, and that Genoa City had a way of turning private problems into public disasters. Noah's presence was supposed to be a stabilizing force, a reassurance that not everyone in the Newman orbit was spiraling. Yet the tragedy of the moment is that the very person trying to do the right thing might be the one who sets the match to the powder keg, not through malice or neglect, but because addiction has a way of dragging everyone nearby into its undertow, and Nick's worsening state threatens to demolish Noah's good intentions before they ever really have a chance to hold. The tension between Noah's promise and the reality of his desires becomes sharper the more he leans into his connection with Sienna, a woman who represents both fresh possibility and looming complication. While Noah looks at Sienna and sees a chance at a future that isn't defined by the cycles of Newman drama, Nick looks at her through a lens clouded by suspicion, resentment, and something he does not want to admit as attraction. Their dynamic is prickly from the start, laced with mutual disdain, harsh words, and instant judgments. He wants her gone, out of Noah's life, out of the city, out of proximity to Sharon's fragile progress. She pushes back, untamed and unapologetic, refusing to be shamed into disappearing just because Nick Newman has decided she's a problem. On the surface, Nick's hostility seems straightforward, the protective father who distrusts the woman his son is falling for, but underneath that anger is a roiling mix of envy, loneliness, and escalating chemical dependence. Every time he numbs himself with another pill, his control loosens just a little more, and the line between what he truly believes and what his addiction whispers in his ear begins to blur. That is why the question of whether Nick could end up in bed with Sienna doesn't feel like wild fanfiction, but a disturbingly plausible outcome of a man who is no longer steering his own choices as clearly as he thinks. Viewers have picked up on the electricity in every heated exchange between Nick and Sienna, that peculiar soap opera alchemy where hatred doesn't cool a connection but intensifies it, twisting it into something primal and dangerous. Fans discuss it online with a mixture of dread and anticipation, noting how often genuine loathing in Genoa City has been a prelude to impulsive, destructive intimacy. They watch Nick snap at Sienna, tell her to stay away, insist that she is bad for Noah, and they can't help thinking that the louder and more forceful he becomes, the more likely it is that he will eventually cross a line with her, especially in a moment when the pills dull his better judgment. The idea that Nick might end up sleeping with Sienna is shocking, but not unbelievable. In fact, it is precisely the kind of morally complicated twist that fans have learned to anticipate. The notion that this might happen while he is high in a haze of confusion and anger makes it even more devastating, because it reinforces an ugly truth. Addiction doesn't just wreck bodies. It wrecks relationships, it sabotages loyalty, and it pushes people into choices that they will spend years trying to live down. The speculation that Nick and Sienna could not only sleep together but also blow up an entire family gathering in the process only adds to the impending sense of doom. One can easily imagine a night meant to be a tentative step toward unity, some kind of Newman get-together structured around the illusion that everything is still manageable. Sharon making an effort to appear composed, Noah trying to divide his attention between protecting his mother and connecting with Sienna. Nick oscillating between forced charm and inward withdrawal as the pills tug at his mood. All it takes is one moment, one argument that goes too far, one confrontation between Nick and Sienna that spills out of the realm of words and into something reckless. Whether it happens in a side room in the middle of the event or later that night in the aftermath, the result is the same. A boundary is shattered, and when the truth eventually comes out, it will not merely be a private betrayal, but a dagger driven straight into the heart of multiple relationships at once. The family gathering, instead of being a step toward healing, becomes the symbolic setting of their undoing, the night that everyone will look back on and say, that was when everything that might have been repaired instead collapsed. What makes this potential twist so potent is how neatly it aligns with both character psychology and the meaty realities of daytime television. February is sweeps month, a time when shows like The Young and The Restless traditionally pull out their most explosive surprises to lock in viewers and spike emotional investment. A pairing like Nick and Sienna is precisely the type of narrative grenade that can deliver that jolt. It doesn't just shock for shock's sake, it reverberates through every layer of the story canvas. A man who has been slowly inching toward a fragile reconciliation with Sharon suddenly sabotages that progress in a way that feels almost unforgivable. A son who trusted his father enough to rely on him as protector and ally discovers that the same man has crossed the ultimate line with the woman he loves. A newcomer who was already viewed with suspicion becomes the focal point of an emotional explosion that confirms every fear the family had about her, even if she is not the only one at fault. During a time when the show needs a seismic event for February surveys, Nick turning to Sienna in a moment of drug-fueled weakness could easily qualify as one of the most shocking and game-changing moves available. The consequences for Noah are brutal and almost unavoidable. Once he learns that Nick has betrayed him with Sienna, whether he walks in on them, discovers it through whispered gossip, or hears it confessed in broken fragments, the damage is instant and deep. This is not a minor disagreement or even a typical Newman betrayal. This is a rupture of primal trust between father and son. Noah had stayed in Genoa City in part to honor his father's request and in part to support his mother through the chaos. He bent his own desires around the needs of his family and tried to navigate the tension between protecting Sharon and following his heart with Sienna. To then discover that Nick, under the influence of addiction and jealousy, has crossed a line that Noah never saw coming, feels like confirmation of every fear he has ever had about the Newman name. It turns his promise into a cruel joke and forces him to reassess not just his relationship with his father, but his relationship with the entire town. In that moment, cutting ties with Nick is not a dramatic gesture, it is an act of self-preservation. To stay connected to a father who could wound him this deeply, in this specific way, would be to accept that his pain is secondary to Nick's impulses and excuses. The fallout with Sienna is just as inevitable, even if it plays differently. Noah may have fallen for her, believed in their connection, seen in her a shared desire to escape the pre-scripted roles everyone seems forced into in Genoa City. But once she crosses that line with his father, the relationship cannot be salvaged. Whether Sienna is driven by anger at Nick, by her own self-destructive tendencies, by momentary loneliness, or by a calculated decision to burn everything down, the end result is catastrophic for Noah. He is left not just rejected, but humiliated, forced to confront the fact that the woman who represented his path out of the chaos chose to tangle herself even more tightly in it. Breaking up with Sienna becomes as necessary as severing ties with Nick, another attempt to carve out a space where Noah can breathe without constantly bracing for the next betrayal. Yet ending things does not magically resolve the emotional trauma, it simply creates a vacuum where trust used to be, leaving Noah to question whether he can afford to open himself up to anyone in this town ever again. From a broader story perspective, this chain reaction opens the door to a series of significant changes that can reshape the landscape of the young and the restless for months, even years, to come. Sharon, already fragile from the ongoing turmoil, will be forced to confront yet another devastating blow, this time tied directly to the man she was tentatively moving closer to again. The chic reunion that had been slowly and delicately built up will not simply be postponed, it may be shattered in a way that makes any future reconciliation feel nearly impossible. Sharon will have to grapple with whether this latest betrayal is a symptom of Nick's addiction or a truth about who he really is when pushed to his limits, and neither answer is comforting. Nick, meanwhile, will be staring down the kind of spiritual rock bottom that no amount of medication can obscure. Losing Sharon, losing Noah, and publicly disgracing himself with Sienna could finally force him to see his addiction for what it is, but redemption in Genoa City never comes cheap. And there is no guarantee that anyone will be waiting for him on the other side of recovery. Even the community around them will not emerge unchanged. The Newman family's public image, already dented by years of scandal, will take yet another hit as whispers of Nick's latest misstep circulate. Sienna's place in the town will be precarious at best. She may become the convenient scapegoat, the outsider blamed for corrupting both father and son, even though the truth is far more complex. The emotional temperature at every family gathering, every business meeting, every casual run-in at Crimson Lights or the Shadow Room will rise. Because this isn't the sort of drama that stays contained, it leaks into alliances, rivalries, and business decisions. If Noah ultimately chooses to leave town again after severing his ties with Nick and Sienna, that departure will not feel like just another one of his periodic exits. It will feel like Genoa City losing one of the few people who still believe there might be another way to live, a quieter, more honest life away from constant crisis. All of this is why the idea of Nick and Sienna ending up in bed together in the middle of this storm feels like more than just a provocative twist. It feels like the precise intersection where addiction, anger, generational trauma, and February sweeps collide. It is a storyline that promises not just shock, but deep and lasting consequences, the kind that can ripple through every corner of the canvas. The spoilers suggesting that Noah will cut off his father and end things with Sienna point to sweeping change on the horizon. A restructuring of relationships and loyalties that could redefine entire character arcs. The only real question left is whether this will be the moment that finally forces the Newmans to confront the damage they continually inflict on one another, or whether it will simply be one more tragedy folded into a long pattern of hurt and half-forgiven wounds. As February unfolds and the show leans into its need for something truly seismic, viewers are left waiting for the scene they both dread and can't look away from. Wondering whose heart will shatter loudest when the truth finally detonates in the middle of a family that has already survived more than most and still somehow finds new ways to break.